I'm not like most men. I found out my wife was cheating on me, and while I took her back, I humiliated her in front of our church. It wasn't always this way. We were high school sweethearts, married for 26 years. I met her while we were still kids. I was always a religious person with a strong Christian upbringing. I wanted to become a pastor, and my wife, she got a degree in education and became a teacher. Teaching is one of those jobs where affairs are more common. We never had children. I focused on becoming a pastor, and she was starting her career as a teacher. After a long search, I found a church that was looking for a pastor, and I was lucky enough to get the job. It took me 10 years of hard work to get there, but I finally had my own church. My wife was with me the whole time, supporting me through it all. She would travel with me whenever I spoke at different churches, helping me prepare and giving me moral support. It felt like we had a solid life together. We had a big extended family. My wife had 2 sisters and 2 brothers. I had 3 sisters. They all went to church regularly, and we were this picture-perfect Christian family, gathering for Sunday dinners and church events. But that image of perfection didn't last. One day after church, my wife was helping me with a sermon. During the service, I noticed her sitting next to a woman from our congregation, and they were whispering. The woman was crying, and it was clear something was wrong. When I asked, my wife explained that the woman believed her husband was cheating, but didn't know who the other woman was. We tried to console her. Over the next few months, she reached out to us for support, asking for prayers and help. She was struggling emotionally and even took time off work because she still hadn't figured out who her husband's affair partner, AP, was. My wife was there for her, comforting her as much as she could. They worked at the same school, and it seemed like they grew closer during this hard time. Over time, the woman seemed to improve, and she and her husband decided to work on their marriage. They even started going to counseling. My wife continued to offer support to the woman and her husband. It felt good to help someone in need, and we still saw them at church now. And then, after some time, things began to shift. My wife used to stay late at school to help her students, but she would always come home before dark. That started to change. She began staying at school much later, sometimes well past dark, and when I called her, she wouldn't answer. This became more frequent, and one night I decided to go to her school when she didn't pick up the phone. But when I got there, her car wasn't in the parking lot. Worried, I went home and waited. She came back an hour later. I asked where she had been, and she told me she had gone to meet the couple from church to talk and pray with them. I didn't question her, thinking she was just helping a couple in need. But as the weeks passed, her behavior grew more suspicious. She kept staying late at school and coming home after dark, often without telling me where she was. I didn't push her for details, choosing to trust her. However, one night she came home with a bag full of expensive-looking gifts. When I asked her about it, she explained that the couple from church had given them to her to thank her for all the support she had provided. I found it strange. Gifts that expensive didn't seem right, but I let it go. She continued to bring home gifts from the couple over the next few weeks. It started to feel odd, but I didn't confront her. One day, I overheard her on the phone, speaking in a whisper. When I asked who she was talking to, she said it was just a colleague from school. But then a few days later, we ran into the husband of that same couple at the mall. As soon as she saw him, she turned pale. She grabbed my arm and pulled me away, ending the conversation as quickly as she could. That's when I knew something was definitely wrong. When we got home, I asked her again if anything was going on between her and the man. She denied it, saying nothing was happening. I wanted to believe her, but her reaction at the mall kept replaying in my mind. My trust in her was breaking. That night, we didn't talk much, and I felt a deep, sinking feeling inside me. My faith and my marriage were being tested like never before. A few days later, she sat me down and apologized again. She swore she wasn't cheating, but admitted she might have given the wrong impression to her coworker's husband. She promised me she would set boundaries and be more careful. I tried to let it go, to trust her again. For a while, things did seem better. She started coming home earlier, and her behavior returned to normal. But then, about 3 months later, one of the church members approached me after a sermon. He told me he had something important to share and asked if we could speak privately. We went to a back room, and he showed me something that left me speechless, a series of photos of my wife holding hands with another man, walking into a hotel. I looked closer and realized the man in the photos was her coworker's husband, the same man we'd been trying to help. The church member explained that he owned some land near the hotel, and he had noticed my wife's car parked outside. Out of curiosity, he watched as a man approached her car, opened the door, and kissed her before they walked into the hotel together. He had taken pictures of everything. My heart sank. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The betrayal was real, and there was no more denying it. I asked him to send me all the photos, which he did. I thanked him for coming forward, though I felt like my world had just collapsed. After he left, I sat in my car in the church parking lot, staring at the photos on my phone. Anger, sadness, and disbelief washed over me. My mind raced, trying to process everything. When my wife got into the car, I calmly asked her how the couple was doing, as if nothing had changed. She answered, saying they were doing fine, completely unaware that I now knew the truth. I didn't confront her right away. I needed time to think, to decide what to do next. But inside, I was breaking. The days that followed were tense. I hadn't told my wife that I knew about her affair, but I couldn't look at her the same way. Every time she spoke, every time she acted like nothing was wrong, it only fueled the storm inside me. I started avoiding conversations, keeping my distance, all while planning what I would do next. I knew I couldn't hold this in forever. I needed a way to confront her, but I didn't want to do it in private. I felt like her betrayal needed to be exposed. Just as she had shattered my trust, I wanted to break the image of perfection we had built. The following Sunday, I came up with a plan. It was a bold, almost cruel plan, but at that point, I felt like nothing could be more painful than what I had already seen. I prepared a sermon about the importance of trust and loyalty in marriage, about how infidelity can destroy not only a relationship, but also the lives surrounding it. Throughout the week, I gathered all the pictures of her affair, the ones the church member had sent me, and created a PowerPoint presentation. On Sunday morning, I stood in front of the congregation, delivering what would be one of the hardest sermons of my life. My heart pounded as I spoke about faith, about the sanctity of marriage, and about the consequences of betrayal. I glanced over at my wife a few times. She sat in her usual spot, completely unaware of what was about to happen. As I approached the end of the sermon, I could feel the tension building inside me. This was it. And now, I said, my voice steady but cold, I want to show you something important. I clicked the button, and the first image appeared on the screen. It was a photo of my wife, kissing her coworker's husband outside the hotel. Gasps echoed through the church. People turned to look at her, their eyes wide with shock and disbelief. My wife's face went pale as the reality of what was happening hit her. She stood frozen, her eyes filling with tears as more photos flashed across the screen, each one showing her betrayal in painful detail. Her coworker, the woman whose husband she had been cheating with, was sitting just a few rows away. She, too, burst into tears as the images unfolded. It was as if time had stopped in the church. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. All you could hear were the muffled sobs of the two women whose lives had just been ripped apart. When the last image faded from the screen, I stood there in silence for a moment, letting the weight of what had just happened sink in. Then, I turned to the congregation and said, "Obviously, there's a lot of work to be done in my marriage. I ask for your prayers as we navigate this difficult time." With that, I closed the sermon. My wife ran out of the church, her face buried in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. The congregation was still in shock, whispering to each other in disbelief. I spoke to a few members who stayed behind, offering their sympathy and support. But I couldn't focus. My mind was spinning, and my heart was heavy. When I finally got to the car, my wife was sitting there, still crying. She looked up at me, her face streaked with tears, and immediately began apologizing. "I'm sorry," she sobbed. "It was a mistake. I don't know what I was thinking. Please forgive me. I'll never do it again." I sat there numb. I didn't respond. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I was too drained for that. I just drove us home in silence. I knew she was sorry, but at that moment, I couldn't tell if it was genuine remorse or if she was just terrified of losing everything. My emotions were a mess. I didn't know what to believe anymore. Later that day, I called one of the deacons and told him what had happened. I explained that I needed some time away from the church, and he assured me that they would take care of things in my absence. I wasn't sure how long I would be gone, but I knew I couldn't stand in front of the congregation again. Not right now. I needed time to heal, time to figure out what to do next. At home, my wife continued to apologize. She promised she would do whatever it took to fix our marriage, to earn back my trust. But I didn't know if I had it in me to forgive her. Every time I looked at her, I saw those pictures. I saw the lies, the betrayal. She swore it was over, that it had only been a temporary lapse in judgment. But how could I ever be sure? We lived in Virginia, where you have to be separated for at least a year before filing for divorce. The thought of divorce lingered in my mind, but I wasn't ready to make that decision yet. As a pastor, I had always preached about forgiveness and redemption. Now I was being tested to live by my own words. Could I forgive her? Could we rebuild what had been broken? Or was this the end of our marriage? For now, I didn't have any answers. All I knew was that I needed time to think, time to heal, and maybe time to figure out if there was any hope left for us. In the days that followed, my wife's apologies continued, but the distance between us grew wider. Each time I looked at her, the pain and betrayal came flooding back. I tried to pray, to ask for guidance, but my mind was clouded. Forgiveness felt impossible, yet divorce seemed just as unbearable. I didn't know how to navigate this storm. She promised me over and over that she would do anything to regain my trust. She said she'd go to counseling, cut ties with the man, and do whatever it took to fix things. But trust is a fragile thing. Once it's broken, it can never fully return to what it was before. I could see she was scared, desperate to fix the damage, but I was just tired. Tired of wondering if she was telling the truth. Tired of questioning everything I thought I knew about our life together. As I stepped away from the church, I found myself in a strange place. I had always preached about the power of forgiveness and redemption, but now I was the one being asked to forgive the unforgivable. Was it possible? Could our marriage be saved? Or was it too far gone? I didn't know. What I did know was that I needed space to process, to figure out if I could ever truly move forward. My wife wanted to fix things right away, but I wasn't ready. I told her we needed time apart, at least emotionally, if not physically. We still lived in the same house, but it felt like we were miles away from each other. The congregation, of course, was still buzzing. People had their opinions, their judgments, and plenty of advice. Many encouraged me to leave her, to start fresh. Others told me to stay, to work through it, and show the church what it meant to practice what I had always preached. But none of them were living my life. None of them knew the depth of my pain. As a pastor, I was expected to lead by example. But what example was I setting if I stayed in a marriage that had been built on lies? And what example would I set if I just walked away without trying to repair what had been broken? In Virginia, we had to be separated for a year before we could even consider divorce. That gave me time to decide if I could forgive, if I could heal, and if our marriage could be restored. Right now, I'm not sure where this journey will lead. Maybe we'll find a way back to each other. Maybe this is the end of us. Only time will tell. For now, I'm focused on prayer, counseling, and taking things one day at a time. My wife says she's committed to doing whatever it takes to make things right, but trust is not something that can be rebuilt overnight. It's a long, difficult road, and I don't know if we'll make it to the other side. If you find yourself in a situation like this, take your time to process your emotions. Healing from betrayal doesn't happen quickly, and trust isn't easily restored. Whether you choose to work on your relationship or move on, give yourself the space to make decisions that are right for you, not just what others expect. For more stories and advice, don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel for updates. I'll keep sharing real-life experiences and insights to help others facing difficult times like this. Stay strong and take things one day at a time.